Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. In this one we start out in the direction of Kostiantynivka, where the Russians have launched a massive armored assault towards the city. We see that the Russians, according to the Ukrainian report, launched an assault that included 57 armored vehicles, 12 motorcycles and 200 assault troops. According to the report by the Ukrainian soldiers of the 79th Separate Amphibious Assault Brigade, the Russians launched this assault with 11 tanks, 45 armored combat vehicles with landing forces, a Terminator tank, and additional 12 motorcycles. According to the report, the Ukrainians managed to damage or destroy 6 tanks, 7 armored personnel carriers, and 12 motorbikes. That means all of the motorbikes and a fraction of the armored personnel carriers, about 20%, and half of the tanks, according to the report, were damaged or destroyed. They then claimed that following that, the rest of the vehicles decided to flee the battlefield. After knocking out the first few tanks and armored vehicles, they then launched FPV drones and attacks on the infantry that landed in the town. So based on this, we can already see that there are a few issues with the report. First off, they never name which of the armored vehicles, tanks, or motorbikes that actually left the infantry. That means all 12 motorbikes could have landed their troops inside of the town before being destroyed. We do not see any video evidence of the motorbikes at all, much less how they are destroyed. At the same time, we do not see whether or not these armored vehicles that fled the battlefield managed to drop off the infantry and then leave, or if they were destroyed on their way to it and then ran away. It is not clear at all based on the video or the reports, and the video is naturally heavily edited. Therefore, we can, based on this information we have available, know that some infantry managed to land. It is unclear how many, but that means that the Russians have gained a foothold. And at the same time, they report that they used FPV drones and others to hit the infantry after the landing, and the armored vehicles left the town after the landing. Therefore, we can confirm it is only a foothold, and whether or not that foothold is still there, we cannot confirm based on the singular report from Ukrainian sources. Until corroborative reports arrive from Russian sources, we cannot tell about the whole situation. But again, if your story is the only story that comes out, it's very easy to paint something where the other side takes hundreds of casualties and that they failed to achieve anything, while in reality it could be very different, but we do not know the whole story. Therefore, all we can say is the territorial change that has happened is that the Russians gained a foothold. Other than that, we saw a few seconds to a minute of video footage that shows a few vehicles getting destroyed, nowhere near the claim that they are making. Moving on to the next section of the front line, we see here in the direction of the Avdiivka section, the Russians have advanced in 4 separate areas, as they have been for the past few days. This is a continuous Russian offensive, and according to the latest reports, they've even advanced further. But what has been confirmed is the Russians have now gained full control over Novoselivka Persha, as is seen with this duplicated footage of the Russians raising the flag on the western outskirts of the town. Therefore, we see that the Russians have gained full control over the town in a very fast frame of time compared to what has seen previously. Novoselivka Persha is comparable to that of Novomikhailivka in size, and it has even more fortified positions, as is seen with the heavily fortified area to the north of the town, which the Russians captured fairly quickly. So we see the Russians managed to capture Novoselivka Persha very quickly compared to previous assaults. Further north, the Russians have entered Vovche, where according to the latest reports they've even gained full control of it. They've managed to capture half of the fortified position east of Vovche, where according to the latest report they have been reportedly captured all of it, but this has yet to be confirmed. So we see that the Russians are very close to, if they haven't already, captured both Vovche and the fortified position ending the Ukrainian presence in the eastern part of the Vovcha river line here in the northern parts of it, leaving only a singular village on the right bank of it, which is this area called Skushnet, which is hardly able to be called a village. It is more just these 2 or 3 buildings within the area. So we see that the majority of the Ukrainian presence has now been erased from the eastern part of the Vovcha river line. In the north, by Timofivka, the Russians have launched further assaults west of the village of Lusovatske, where they are looking to gain control over the road here between Progress and Lusovatske. This is to cut off the final Ukrainian fortified positions in the area and start a battle towards Timofivka, Lyshishne, and Ivanivka here to the west of Lusovatske. The Russian development around the Avdiivka section of the front line shows that the Russians continuously push towards the city of Pokrovsk and the fortified positions along the highway between Kostiantynivka and Pokrovsk, and with the recent offensive push towards Kostiantynivka, the front line continues to develop. In the direction of Kupiansk, the Russians, following the capture of Peshane, are pushing further westwards. Ignoring the Ukrainian fortified positions north and south of Peshane, the Russians are going straight for the Uskil river line, which is a very interesting development because, well, it doesn't really make much sense, according to my opinion. Therefore, we'll have to see what happens and what develops. Maybe the Russians already have positions and captured the fortified positions both north and south of Peshane, as we do not have that information readily available yet. So we see that the situation develops westwards of Peshane towards the Uskil river line, where the Russians are now only 6 kilometers from the river line. This is half the distance they had prior to the capture of Peshane, so they covered half of the distance within the past few days, from the 19th to the 25th, so in less than a week they captured half of the distance between the Uskil river line and the Russian front line. Now, something very interesting was released by The Guardian, and that is this interview by Syrsky. The commander of the Ukrainian armed forces says some very interesting things. First off, we talk about the balance of power and the Russian development from the start of the war. According to Syrsky, the Russians started with only a 100,000 strong invasion force, which has previously been quoted to be somewhere around 175,000 to 200,000. This means that the original force, which was much smaller than originally stated. This means that at the very first day of the war, the Russians were already at a 3-to-1 disadvantage, with the Ukrainians numbering about 300,000 to the Russians 100,000. At the same time, he says that the force has now grown to 520,000, which is not the same number as Putin is saying at around 600 to 700,000 soldiers right now. He said that the goal of the Russians is to increase this number to 690,000 troops at the end of the year. The figures for Ukraine have not been made public. When it comes to equipment, there's a ratio of 1-to-2 or 1-to-3 in their favor. Since 2022, the number of Russian tanks has doubled, from 1,700 to 3,500. Artillery systems have tripled, and armored personnel carriers gone up from 4,500 to 8,900. The enemy has a significant advantage in force and resources. Therefore, for us, the issue of supply, the issue of quality is really at the forefront. So we see here that the Russians have significantly increased the number of equipments that they have available, either doubled or tripled pretty much everything they need to use. Now, Syrsky mentions the quality as something that could give them an advantage. But if we take a look at the map in the direction of the Avdiivka section of the front line, we see that the Russians have managed to advance in Progress and Vovche for the last few days, at a rate where they advance every single day without any stop. And that is despite the fact that these 2 geolocated footages have come out over the past few days during the battle over Progress, where we see that the Russians have destroyed 2 Ukrainian Abrams tanks in the vicinity of the town. So despite the Ukrainians sending their 47th Mechanized Brigade with Abrams tanks, which they claim are superior to the Soviet tanks, and soldiers trained by NATO, they are unable to stop or even slow down the Russian advance near Progress. This is incomparable to the time at Berdeshi, where the Ukrainians actually managed to recapture some territory and push the Russians back and slow down the Russian advance. This time around, it has not been slowed down at all. Instead, the Abrams tanks were destroyed before they even reached the front line. Well, I'll just end off the video here because reading any more will just give me more stress and reduce the amount of brain cells I have available. So that'll be all for this video. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.